Chapter 18, The Ghost Dancer. The Legend of Sunset Shimmer, Majora's Mask. By Ganondorf 8. July 4, 2016. Chapter 18, The Ghost Dancer. Mrs. Cheerilee pointed to a small bench to my right and told me that I could rest there for as long as I needed. It wasn't what I called practical, but it was better than sleeping on the floor, the unfortunate alternative. As I slept, I started dreaming about my friends, and we were at Canterlot High talking about our future goals. I yearned for things to return to normal, yet I knew that wasn't possible. I had to stop the moon from falling. So far, I had freed one of Termina's guardians who protected it, yet 3 others were trapped, most likely within the masks of giant bosses created by the magic Starlight Glimmer possessed. From what Her Highness told me about her when she came to visit after the Friendship Games, Starlight was an exceptional unicorn, gifted in the magic arts and possessing a magic that was on par with that of an alicorn. A part of me felt jealous as my magic never got that powerful, but then I did leave Equestria to find my own path. Had I chosen to remain and continued my studies, my magic would have been equal to that of Twilight. She said in a message a week later that Starlight had become her second pupil after me, but felt that she shouldn't get to know me just yet. I thought Her Highness had cast me aside, but I quickly learned that wasn't the case at all. If Starlight knew about the existence of another world, one where equestrian magic was still new, it might have caused her to go into a relapse, and possess a desire to subjugate the humans in a bid for equality. I knew firsthand about suffering a relapse. During the first weeks of my reformation, there were times where I wanted to have my power back, and resume my bid to conquer Equestria with an iron hoof. My friends helped me ignore those temptations, and now I no longer desire that old life. Of course, it didn't help that a manifestation of my old self existed in the form of Sunset Demon, a psychotic being who wanted to assume my life as it used to be. She's gone, now a huge relief there when she finally collapsed after our second great battle in Hyrule. In a way, I felt guilty that she had to die like that. I was the one who brought her to life, all because of how twisted I was back then. Sunset Demon didn't deserve the treatment she got from me or from Ganondorf, but perhaps now she can finally rest in peace, and not yearn for anything other than a blissful existence. As I continued to dream, Ganondorf didn't appear to taunt me in his usual manner, yet his words continued to haunt me. He wanted to fight me again just as he'd done before after I succeeded in saving Hyrule. When I fought him, it felt like I was fighting an omnipotent being who just couldn't be stopped no matter what I did. Compared to his younger self, he was in a league of his own, yet surely he possessed a weakness somewhere. I had no idea when he would issue our next contest. That alone filled me with dread. He could summon me to wherever he chooses and I'd have no choice in the matter. His power was far beyond anything I had ever felt before. I had taken on Her Highness, our friends, the Sirens, and even the human version of Twilight, yet they were nothing compared to the likes of Ganondorf. Then I thought about Her Highness. What did she truly think about what had happened to us? I was used to it from my previous experience, yet she was a stranger going around a world that was no longer the one she had come to know. Could Twilight snap and lose it? I feared that as a possibility, and I needed to make sure it never came to pass. It wasn't just my life on the line, but hers as well. We were both trapped in a dangerous game with a great evil overlooking us as the game's master. When I finally woke up after an 8-hour rest, I immediately checked to make sure Twilight was alright. Sure enough, she remained safe and sound, sleeping on top of my hat. I didn't want to wake her in case she had experienced a nightmare. I've had more than my fair share of those, but that wasn't meant to be. I had almost forgotten what we were doing prior to falling asleep. I turned to my left, and Mrs. Cheerilee was standing there, eyes wide open, as though she knew exactly when I would wake up.
"Did you have a pleasant rest?"
Mrs. Cheerilee asked.
"Aside from 1 or 2 internal issues, I really needed it,"
I answered.
"When you have much on your mind, one tends to lose focus until they can no longer handle things. I do have a lot going on right now. You need not tell me such matters as they are clearly not meant for my ears,"
Mrs. Cheerilee said, taking out her umbrella and raised it above her head. The look she had in her eyes told me that she was ready to get our race started. I was glad that I didn't forget about that.
"If you would like, Mrs. Sunset Shimmer, we can wait for your little friend to awaken before we get underway. I would not want her expressing disgust for being rudely woken up on account of my challenge." "No, I think she will just come out of it on her own." "Very well. As I mentioned to you earlier, all you need to do is to keep up with me as I lead you through the dark recesses of the Deku Shrine. There is no time limit that you must reach to be deemed successful, but know that taking it slow will only make the experience more unpleasant,"
Mrs. Cheerilee said.
What do you mean? That is for you to find out once we begin. You may use anything in your possession, so do not think that you are restricted to just your natural ability. You may learn that relying on your various skills shall prove beneficial.
Mrs. Cheerily answered. She then opened up her umbrella, and suddenly began to float in the air. Was this another form of Deku magic? Or, was it something only she could do? Either way, I realized the full extent of her magic, and that she wasn't kidding about her speed. I assumed Mrs. Cheerily would run through the shrine, but flying through was completely unexpected.
If you are too slow, then the creatures shall feast upon you.
She then started to fly away from me, only backwards, leaving me to start running in a bid to keep up. She must have known the layout of the shrine's dark recesses to act so confidently. There was no other explanation behind it. I knew this wasn't going to be an easy challenge, but this only further proved that Mrs. Cheerily was dead serious.
Hey? Sunset? What's going on?
Twilight asked in a groggy state.
Ah. You're awake.
I answered.
I was having a pleasant sleep until you started running. Sorry. It was either that or wake you up personally. Well, I'm glad you were considerate, but couldn't you have made it less bumpy? If I had chosen to walk instead of run, I'd have lost sight of Mrs. Cheerily, and get us lost in the Deku Shrine.
I answered. It took Twilight a few seconds to remember why we had come to the shrine in the first place. She then looked ahead to see what it was that we were chasing, and found it difficult to believe that Mrs. Cheerily was flying in front using an umbrella. I assumed she thought wings were going to be involved, but I was only partially surprised by the revelation.
We can't afford to go too slow, otherwise we could succumb to the creatures that lurk about down here,
I said.
Okay, so we know that we need to keep up with her. Yes, but where she's going has yet to be determined. If Mrs. Cheerily said you need to keep up with her, then you need to do exactly that. Ignore any and all obstacles that get in your way, and don't be tempted by any rupees you may see scattered about the floor.
Twilight said. I thought she was crazy about there being any rupees, but I quickly retracted my statement upon seeing the shiny gems. Certain paths contained them, and that immediately told me going down those paths would lead to a dead end, or perhaps a hungry monster who hadn't eaten for a while. At first, the path we took was just a straight line that went down several flights of stairs every few hundred meters, but that changed upon reaching the first corner. Luckily, I reacted fast enough and didn't smack into it, and continued following Mrs. Cheerily. One thing I did notice was that whenever I got close enough, she suddenly moved further away as though she were trying to maintain a specific distance. I had learned that this was known as rubber bending, yet I didn't think it would happen in a situation like this. Along the path were a number of mad scrubs. The obstacles she mentioned were of the violent type, and torches lined several corners giving off weak amounts of light, but then it soon became apparent that I was slowly falling behind. I saw myself as an average athlete. I wasn't as sports heavy as, say, Rainbow Dash, yet how come she was getting further and further ahead? Did her umbrella truly possess great power, or had I gotten slightly softer since the friendship games?
She's a lot faster than I gave her credit for. Maybe you should switch back to being a human. Wouldn't that freak her out knowing that I'm not a Deku scrub? Didn't she say that she knew you weren't?
Twilight asked. I thought back to what Mrs. Cheerily said when I asked if I was worthy of taking her tribe's rite of passage. I slapped my forehead knowing I was making things much harder for myself by running with such a small body. Twilight then bopped me on the head to get my attention.
I don't know if you can remove your mask, Sunset. If you waste any time, Mrs. Cheerily will end up getting really far ahead, and catching her will be impossible.
I needed more speed, and my own body could easily provide that, but would it cost me both the race and the mask?
It's your decision to make,
Twilight said. There was no other choice. I had to become a human if I stood a chance. I came to a stop before grabbing at my face, and when the mask started to come off, everything around me suddenly came to a stop. Even Mrs. Cheerily froze in midair as the magic within the mask took effect. Upon becoming human again, I quickly put the Deku mask away, and resumed chasing after her, my speed being much faster than before.
Did you see that, Twilight? I did. Time freezes when you transition from one form to another. Why do you think that is? I've got no idea, but it does mean you can use it to your advantage without fear of wasting time. In your current form, you do become a larger target, but you're faster now and can easily deflect any Deku nuts using your shield.
Twilight answered. After going through several more passageways, including ones that traveled upward and featured awkward platforming sections, whoever came up with the idea of narrow walkways for stairs and narrow gaps were either crazy or did it to test the jumping skills of Deku. The path opened up into a large cavern that consisted of several tree stumps that rose up from the ground. I had no idea how deep the chasm before was, nor was I willing to find out. It didn't faze Mrs. Cheerilee one bit, as she merely floated across towards an open entrance. Her path seemed easy enough until I noticed how wide of a gap existed between the stumps.
Do you think I can take her route?
I asked Twilight, pointing in the direction Mrs. Cheerilee was floating in.
Unless you had the best jumping skills in the world, you're likely to plunge into the abyss below. So the other path is my best bet. Yes, but you need to watch out for the mad scrubs that lie in wait on some of the stumps.
Twilight answered. There were about 3 mad scrubs looking around for anything that was within their attack range, but I couldn't afford to dawdle, especially if it meant keeping up with Mrs. Cheerilee. The tree stumps looked intimidating at first, but it was just like when I jumped from platform to platform back in the forest where all of this started. So long as I didn't jump when one of those scrubs opened fire, or I landed on the edge of a stump and got pelted by a Deku nut, I wouldn't fall down below to my death. I also knew that I had to be quick, so that meant every jump had to be perfect and the mad scrubs were pausing in between shots. I jumped onto the first stump and narrowly avoided a Deku nut. A part of me was tempted to use my sword and put the mad scrub out of its misery, but that would have only been a waste of time. It would have also been a non-heroic act, and I wasn't about to needlessly take away a creature's life without good reason. Jumping to the next stump, I discovered that each one wrapped around the outer edge of what looked like an old tree that must have been down here for centuries. It was the Deku Shrine after all, so nods to the forest were expected. The next 3 stumps proved slightly challenging as the remaining mad scrubs were situated on the first 2. I thought about just rushing through and taking my licks from the oncoming Deku scrubs, but Twilight bopped me on the head to remind me that I could use my shield. It was also a reminder that Mrs. Cheerilee said that I could use anything I had collected to help me get through, and this was a perfect example of needing one of my items. Raising my shield in front of me after removing from my back, I charged forward, blocking the Deku nuts that were being lobbed at me. Again, I chose not to attack the mad scrubs out of not wanting to resort to senseless violence. I also chose not to grab the green rupees that were scattered about on the tree stumps. They were tempting, but my task was to catch up with Mrs. Cheerilee, and not wanting to become richer. One last jump later and I was in the same passageway as she was, yet I knew there was still a long way to go. What was waiting for me in the next section? I had no idea, but I was about to find out in mere moments.
That wasn't so bad. Yet you know there are probably tougher challenges ahead, Sunset. How far do you think this shrine goes? The world underground stretches much farther than either one of us can fathom. I'd say we could go way deep below the surface of Termina, yet this is normal for Deku as they are plants after all.
Twilight answered.
Guess I'd better get going unless I want to fall behind,
I said. The passageway felt just like the one I started the race in, yet I could tell it was different from an aesthetic standpoint. The mold on the walls was a dead giveaway, along with cobwebs that looked like they had been there for centuries. Just like before, mad scrubs and torches were pleasant, yet now there was large balls of fire that served to roast me were I to not weave in between them. No wonder this was seen as a rite of passage. Being so close to fire when you're a plant meant instant death were you to stray off the path a little bit.
Twilight? Do you have any idea what kind of mask I'll get?
I asked as I turned at another corner.
It's hard to say really. I was hoping you wouldn't say that. This world, its tribes, and their customs are all unknown to me, Sunset. Asking me such a question will grant you no answer in return. Not even Tattle's memories can help. It's not like I can access them on a whim, Sunset. I've been trying everything I can to use them more efficiently, but so far my efforts have amounted to nothing. Whenever you talk to someone, that allows me some time to see if I can get to those memories.
Twilight answered. That explained why she was often quiet during those moments. She was struggling to comprehend Tattle's memories so that she could provide more help instead of being nothing but a helpless fairy. I felt guilty for putting any undue pressure onto Her Highness. I apologized for bringing up the question and it caught her by surprise.
No need to apologize for something I should be able to do. I'm supposed to be your fairy partner. While I've been providing solid advice, what lurks within Tattle's memories are what shall truly prove useful. Just don't overexert yourself, okay?
I said. I knew Her Highness was gifted in intelligence as well as magic and friendship, yet she had a tendency to go off the deep end were she to focus too much on a subject. Hopefully, she could find a way to get to those memories, yet I was willing to wait a while for her to do so. Mrs. cheerily continued pulling ahead whenever I got close to her, but then I noticed her snickering slightly before pulling away. What was she planning? She knew this place really well, so was she leading me into a trap? No. She wouldn't do a thing like that. Fluttershy wanted me to have the mask Mrs. Cheerily currently had in her possession, so the idea of her luring me to my death was stupid thinking on my part. However, that wasn't true when it came to what awaited up ahead in the next open area. It consisted of a fast-flowing river. Where it came from and where it went were beyond me, with numerous platforms floating along at the same speed. Apart from a small platform embedded into the back wall with a mad scrub looking around for prey, this area seemed easier than the previous one. That's when a flying Deku nut that came from my right revealed that there was a second platform. Looking quickly to my left, the water flowed through an open grill. I relaxed slightly, knowing I was too big to fit through those bars. Mrs. Cheerily floated over the river, and that meant I had to do the same by using those platforms.
Should I change forms here, Twilight? Why? It could make it easier to jump across. Maybe, but if you fall in the water, the current will drag you through that grill and to your death. Guess I didn't think of it like that. You won't be able to use your shield this time, Sunset. Those two mad scrubs should be easy to avoid given how much room there is, and you can hop across on those moving platforms at certain angles. Better not take too long, otherwise we're going to lose Mrs. Cheerily,
Twilight said. She had since inched closer to the next passageway, so I had to hurry in hopes of not succumbing to the ever-encroaching darkness. I had no time to determine the speed of the platforms, so I jumped to the first one, dodging a Deku nut that just barely flew by my face. Like before, killing them would serve no purpose apart from bloodlust, and I had since figured out they were merely acting as a defensive measure to test those who came this way. I jumped to the first ledge, ran around the mad scrub a few times causing it to fall dizzy, jumped across to the other side, and was just about to jump again when another Deku nut struck me in the back. The sharp pain I felt was enough to make me buckle down slightly, but I gritted my teeth and kept going, knowing that I had to now contend with a shooting pain along with following a butler. Mrs. Cheerily hadn't said anything during the race since it started, and I doubted she had any intention of changing her stance. My aim was to focus on staying close until I finally got to the end of this shrine. I jumped on another platform to the other side before continuing down the new passageway. All of a sudden, Twilight flew under my hat, and that almost made me run into a nearby wall out of sheer surprise.
Twilight? Why did you do that? Can't you hear it? Hear what? The sound of moaning. I thought this was supposed to be a shrine dedicated to the Deku scrubs. You've got to be kidding me,
I said. I then closed my mouth in order to hear the sound that had freaked Twilight out. It was very faint, but I could hear a distinctive moaning coming from somewhere, and I slapped my forehead in response. It was a noise I was hoping to never hear again after what happened before.
Why are there re-deads down here? This isn't a graveyard or the Shadow Temple. What is a re-dead? An undead monster that loves to suck the life force out of its victims. That doesn't sound too bad. Oh, and it has a killer scream that can freeze anyone in their tracks,
I said. That prompted Twilight to suddenly go silent, and I couldn't blame her. Re-deads were truly terrifying creatures that were almost impervious to most attacks. It took many hits before they finally dropped down dead, become more dead than they already were, but their screaming was nothing short of sheer aggravation. If they were truly down here, I couldn't afford to fall behind Mrs. Cheerily. The next staircases upwards became even more annoying, as now there were narrow steps surrounded by slopes. I slid down several of these before managing to get to the top, yet this was nothing compared to the boulders that suddenly came barreling down the path. What kind of test would have Dekus avoid massive boulders? It felt more like a test suited to anyone other than a Deku, but then I was ignorant in their ways. As I continued forward, the passageway opened up to an even larger area than before. There were 3 tree stumps. How deep this chasm went was anyone's guess, and each had a circle of fire. My eyes then detected a crystal switch located on a 4th stump that was isolated in the middle of the chamber. Finally, the path turned to the right towards the 3 initial stumps, so I knew what needed to be done here. The question was, did I have enough time to do it? Mrs. Cheerily avoided the circles of fire by simply floating across towards where the switch was, and while I thought of cursing her for taking a shortcut, it made sense. She was quite vulnerable to fire. I could easily handle it, so keeping a safe distance was a good idea.
I don't need to tell you what to do here, do I? No. Just know that your first shot needs to count, otherwise we're going to lose her.
Twilight said. I wish she hadn't said that. I mean, I had gotten a lot better at using a bow, but I had some issues when it came to aiming properly. I was of the mindset that I could just fire an arrow and hit my target, but I knew better than to think like that. I also needed to remind myself that I couldn't continue doubting my abilities and being insecure. Taking out the hero's bow and making sure not to accidentally hit Mrs. Cheerily, I aimed carefully at the crystal switch before letting loose an arrow. It flew across the chasm, striking the switch with pinpoint accuracy, activated it, and the fire disappeared in an instant. Since there was no way of knowing how long this would last, I quickly put my bow away and began jumping across the tree stumps. Just because I hit my target with ease didn't mean it would happen again. Maybe I should have considered getting some more practice. Upon making it to the other side, I turned around to see the fire reappeared and the switch lost its glow. Had I taken too long, I would have been knocked down into the chasm below for certain. Turning back, I looked upon yet another passageway, and I just couldn't believe it. How big was this shrine anyway?
This is getting ridiculous,
I said to myself.
I must have traveled several miles by now, and I'm still no closer to getting to the end. Why would Deku scrubs go through such torment for a rite of passage? Why not make it more simple by catering to their skills at flying through the use of Deku flowers?
I resumed running after Mrs. Cheerily, who had gotten slightly ahead due to me stopping, but as I turned around several corners, avoided rupee-filled paths, and mad scrubs who showed no signs of simply letting me pass, another thought came to mind.
If and when I do get to the end, how am I supposed to get back out?
There was no way I could go back the way I came, considering some obstacles only worked in one direction.
I hope Mrs. Cheerily knows of something, otherwise we're both stuck here until I choose to reset time.
That was an option to consider, but one that would deny me using the entire 3 days effectively. When I turned around the next corner, a trail of rupees was right in front of me. Since there were no other paths for me to take, I had no other choice but to continue on and hope that I didn't lose track of Mrs. Cheerily. As I collected them, I heard a strange sound further ahead. In fact, I had been hearing that sound since the race first started. It was the noise her umbrella made. I picked up the pace and entered a smaller area that was lined with 2 rows of mad scrubs, yet they didn't show any signs of wanting to attack.
Did you lose her?
Twilight asked.
I've been following the sound of her umbrella and it led us straight here. That's fine and all, but we need to know where she is. I am here.
Twilight and I immediately looked forward, and there was Mrs. Cheerily, standing in front of another mural that depicted various Deku scrubs. She stood atop a raised platform with a flame situated either side of her. Since she was no longer moving, it meant that I had finally made it to the end, and not a moment too soon. I was on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion, yet I managed to shake off that desire and walked over to her. The mad scrubs went back down into their flowers as I approached, and Mrs. Cheerily bowed slightly before me after she put her umbrella away.
Well done, Mrs. Sunset Shimmer. That was really difficult,
I said as I struggled to catch my breath.
Most would have given up a long time ago, yet you persevered and made it to the very end. I must admit that I actually did not think you were going to make it. Please forgive me for my rudeness towards your abilities,
Mrs. Cheerily said.
So where exactly are we? This room is where all Deku scrubs must come if they are to become adults,
Mrs. Cheerily answered. She then turned to face the mural, produced a lantern from out of nowhere, and beckoned me to come forward and stand next to her. As I did, I checked her lantern to see if the flame within was sealed off. It was.
This painting depicts Deku who have endured many hardships on their path to becoming adults. Do you notice that there are only a few of them? Yes. The rite of passage amongst my kind is a harsh mistress. Most Deku never make it, so while they claim to be adults, they are merely children in the eyes of their peers. If you did make it, you are seen as worthy to the cause,
Mrs. Cheerily said.
What cause? To further the Deku kingdom,
Mrs. Cheerily answered, putting the lantern down on the ground. She turned away from me all of a sudden and began fiddling about as though she were grabbing something. I chose not to pry in case it was something personal. When she turned to face me, I couldn't help but notice what she was holding.
Here is the item that I promised you were you to complete the race. We Deku now pass it on to you.
In her hand was a mask that looked like a pig's face, complete with snout, large beady eyes, and tusks on either side of the snout.
Am I to suspect that you are disappointed with this mask? No, not that, but surprised is all. That is understandable. This mask is known as the Mask of Sense. Anyone who wears it will have their senses heightened to the point where they can smell things they couldn't detect before. You may think it's not very useful to one like yourself, but you would be surprised by its hidden potential.
Mrs. Cheerily said. The mask's appearance was rather off-pointing. Those eyes were really creepy, yet it was something Adajo said I needed, so at the very least, I should accept this gift from the Deku without complaint. I then grabbed the mask from Mrs. Cheerily and held it in my hands.
For example, you cannot smell something like mushrooms with your weak nose, but you can with the mask of sense. Did you say mushrooms? Yes. There is a witch who lives on the far edge of the swamp who collects them.
Mrs. Cheerily answered. My eyes opened wide when she said that. I remembered my encounter with Chrysalis when I first entered the swamp. She mentioned something about mushrooms and how she used to collect them. Perhaps this was something to consider the next time I come into the swamp. For now, it was best to go back to Clock Town and see if there was anything I could do there before resetting time again.
You know, Mrs. Sunset Shimmer. You remind of my son whenever I look at you. He left home a long time ago to understand what he wanted in life, yet at times I wish I knew what he has been up to. Your son. Before he left, he and the Deku princess used to play together all the time. She was his one and only friend who saw her as anything but a princess. And you say I look like him. Well, I wouldn't say you exactly, but rather when you become a Deku scrub. You don't find it odd that I can do that? Most Deku would be appalled at how you can become one of us, but I see it as a unique power that allows you to experience our way of life. Your Deku form. It is that form that reminds me so much of my son.
Mrs. Cheerily answered. That's when I suddenly remembered the strange Deku scrub statue I encountered way back when I was first changed into a Deku by Starlight Glimmer. Twilight said the statue bore a striking resemblance to me, yet we both ultimately ignored it. Was it possible that the statue wasn't a statue at all, but rather Mrs. Cheerily's son? If so, what could have happened to have caused him to become like that? Had Starlight killed him out of sheer pleasure? No, she couldn't have done that. What if her son was like that because of a curse? No, that wouldn't explain why he was where he was in the first place. I then had another thought. Mrs. Cheerily said that it was my Deku scrub form that bore the most resemblance to her son. That meant his spirit was sealed within the Deku mask that Sonata created after the curse was broken, yet it reaffirmed that Starlight killed him. Was I living out someone else's life? If so, why was I even doing it? I grabbed my arms and shuddered for a few moments over such a horrible thought. I assumed I was becoming another version of myself, yet instead I had been portraying an innocent child whose life was taken from him far too soon. How could I ever use the Deku mask again, knowing now how it truly came to be? Another thought crossed my mind. What if Mrs. Cheerily's son had something important he was trying to accomplish, died before he could complete it, and couldn't rest in peace until it had been completed? If that were the case, had I helped him unintentionally to complete something that meant a great deal to him? She said her son used to play with Fluttershy, so was he trying to get back to Woodfall upon learning that she had been kidnapped? Starlight came along and killed him, yet he couldn't rest until Fluttershy was safe. In that sense, I had finished what he started, and now he can find solace in the beyond. Then again, her son may still have unfinished business, such as saving Termina from destruction. Mrs. Cheerily had since noticed my odd behavior, so I let go of my arms and relaxed before turning to face her.
Sorry. I was in deep thought about what you said. I appreciate you showing consideration for my son. Do you miss him? More than anything in the world, but I know that he will return to me one day.
Mrs. Cheerily answered. I didn't have the heart to tell her that her son was dead and not coming back anytime soon.
I felt like I was once again racing my son during our race. As such, I may have tried too hard to outrun you. I may not be young anymore, but I'm still fast to be able to hold my own even against my own son. Please forgive me if I'm sounding rude, Mrs. Sunset Shimmer.
I shook my head in response to her.
Do you see that light shining over there? When did that get there?
I asked. To my right, a glowing section had appeared on the floor.
That appeared because I wished for it. You can use it to return back to the entrance of the Deku Shrine. That is how we Deku manage to leave here once the rite of passage has finished, be it in success or failure. Do not be concerned about what I plan on doing next. I think I shall stay here for a little while before I go back and tend to Her Majesty. I look forward to meeting you again someday, Mrs. Sunset Shimmer. Take care.
Mrs. Cheerily answered. She then bowed before me slightly, turned around to face the mural on the wall, and completely ignored me like she were off in her own little world.
What an unusual character,
Twilight said.
Yeah, but you can tell she has been through some hard times. Why did you grab your arms like you were freezing? I thought about that Deku Scrub statue we encountered back in the beginning. It took me a few minutes to figure everything out, and despite not liking some parts, I've come to respect the form that I become whenever I wear that mask.
I answered.
Mind telling me about it? Sure, but let's get out of here first. I don't think Mrs. Cheerilee should know about it.
I answered. I didn't need to explain my reasons. Twilight could tell from my expression that what I concluded was something we had to discuss elsewhere. Walking into the light, at first nothing happened, but then I was suddenly surrounded by a crystal prism. It began to spin around and raised into the air, taking me with it. Within a matter of moments, Twilight and I were back outside the entrance to the Deku Shrine. I was certain the light would drop us back inside, but I supposed it wasn't anything that was worth complaining about.
Want to play the Song of Soaring and warp back to Clock Town? We've got plenty of time before we need to reset time, so I was thinking we could walk back to town. Besides, we might find something new along the way that we couldn't access before now that I have the Hero's Bow.
I answered.
If we do that, we won't get back to town until the evening. That's fine with me. I suppose you do deserve to relax considering what you went through in Woodfall Temple. The swamp should be more peaceful now that the poison has disappeared, yet you may still encounter some monsters that are native to the area regardless of what you did. Maybe you can try using that new mask you got from Mrs. Cheerilee? Mushrooms do grow rampantly in places like this, so picking up one or two may prove useful for later.
Twilight said. Even though I wasn't planning on paying Chrysalis a visit, perhaps I should, in case giving her a mushroom would do something good for me in return. Then again, I could pay another visit to Trixie at the Swamp Tourist Center. I knew she wouldn't remember me as I saved her during the previous cycle, but it might prove enlightening for me. Rather than become a Deku Scrub and hop across the lily pads, I decided to just wade through and immediately turn right at the main entrance of the palace. Those guards may be happy that their princess has returned, but I doubted they would enjoy seeing a human enter their midst.
Hey! Is like something bumming you out, dear daughter?
Tree Hugger asked.
I was just thinking about Mrs. Sunset Shimmer, mother.
Fluttershy answered.
Oh yeah. I don't think I ever gave her a proper thank you for giving me back my flow by bringing you back to me. I'm sure she already knows that you were appreciative of her actions. You know, that one is one wild and crazy child.
Tree Hugger said as she sat down next to Fluttershy.
She seemed like a calm person on the outside, but deep within, her mojo was seriously taking its toll on her chakra. I'm like gonna assume she has seen things most people her age shouldn't ever see until they've properly sprouted. Mother? Do you think Mrs. Sunset Shimmer is in trouble? Did you notice how sharp that sword of hers was? Yes, but I didn't think it was important. I may not be a sword person like she is, dear daughter, but I've been around long enough and seen plenty of others with swords. The sharper the blade, the more bloodshed they've seen, and the harsher their karma gets for taking lives needlessly. That's a funny thing, karma. Many of those sword people love going around and like cutting up everything that gets in their way, but many wind up meeting their end thanks to karma striking them down.
Tree Hugger said.
You don't think?
Tree Hugger then placed her hand on Fluttershy's shoulder and smiled a gentle smile that was full of sincerity.
Sunset Shimmer may have an awkward mojo probably caused by all that stress she's got, but I know she doesn't like the idea of killing for the sake of it. Come again. She will be fine, dear daughter. I know her aura will be tested in the near future, but only she can determine how it will cope with what lies ahead. You've like already guessed I did a reading of her aura before she left the palace, right?
Tree Hugger asked. Fluttershy nodded meekly.
Her aura burns brighter than any I've ever felt before. In fact, I'd say her aura puts mine to shame. And yet, there is something in her aura that is struggling to overcome a dark influence. I don't know if it will cause her chakra to drop down until it's empty, but if she remains true with her heart, she will succeed. I hope so, mother. By the way, I was totally talking to my advisors before I came out here. Are they mad at me? They weren't expecting you to give them such a spirited pep talk, but I blame myself for not giving them a karma reality check. I know they were only trying to help my people, but their actions totally dug against my vibes. I think they will be playing nice from now on. I could always demand that they take some time off to realign their auras. They're truly righteous fellows but need boundaries.
Tree Hugger answered.
Do you suppose father would be proud of your accomplishments? Your father always viewed me as an inspiration. In fact, he planned on marrying a female Deku scrub who was just as cold as he was, but when he saw me for the first time, he knew that I could change him for the better. Through my blessings, I was able to bring him enlightenment. Our people at first were surprised at how I changed his ebb, but they quickly grew to appreciate my perspective. Before he wilted, your father told me that our kingdom was in perfect hands with me guiding everyone. Sure, my methods are like, totally freaky and radical, but I have to be who I'm meant to be.
Tree Hugger answered. She then looked up at the sky and saw the moon. Its mere presence brought a sense to dread to her face. She looked back at Fluttershy before looking at the moon again, and began humming a tune mixed with strange noises.
Mother! I haven't heard you sing that melody since I was a baby. Looking at that moon bummed me out, but then I remembered that my song always made you feel better. You didn't have to do that for me. But I had to, dear daughter. Look up at the sky.
Tree Hugger said. Fluttershy looked up and her expression turned cold when she saw the moon.
I take it that this is your first time seeing the moon.
Fluttershy nodded before scooting over and cuddled her mother who, in turn, wrapped her hand around her arm and returned a similar affection.
News has reached me that says that our world will be destroyed tomorrow night. I've done everything I could to keep my people from freaking out, but I know that my calming aura isn't enough. Our existence will be wiped out along with everyone else. Isn't there anything that can be done? Pray for a miracle. But don't you do that. There is only so much I can do, but what you see above us is something that's beyond even my awesome powers. Unless a miracle occurs that can save us, there is nothing anyone can do to stop the moon from falling. It will be a huge bummer to everyone.
Tree Hugger answered. She began stroking Fluttershy's hair before looking down at her and smiling in a manner that only a mother knew.
No one can escape from the moon. The humans are trying in vain to save themselves, but it's in vain. They will all die with the rest of us. That's why I intend on doing something I should have done long ago.
Tree Hugger then let go of her daughter and stood up.
I need to have the rites of passage prepared for those Deku who seek to become adults before it's too late. It's the least I can do at this point.
My trek back through the southern swamp was a lot more pleasant than what I was expecting. Because the poison had disappeared thanks to Odolwe's defeat, I could now wade through the water as opposed to having to take it carefully. Most of the monsters had either vanished or crawled back into their holes in the ground, and I was perfectly fine with that. I had no intention of going around and slaughtering them just because they happened to be dangerous. I was certain many of them were only seeking to protect their territory from others who wanted to barge in. Unless any of them were charging at me, I just avoided them and left them to their own devices. I tried using the Mask of Sense in an effort to find a mushroom, but there weren't any on the path back to the Swamp Tourist Center. Twilight suggested to me that if I wanted to pick up a mushroom, I should consider visiting the Woods of Mystery. I did consider the option but ultimately decided against it. Even though I did have plenty of time left, it was better served trying to get any additional items that could help me prepare for the next leg of my journey. The cold reaches of Snowhead were my next destination according to Twilight. The very thought of trudging through the snow sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't a fan of the cold, and that was thanks to always slipping on the ice during the winter season. Hopefully, Her Highness wouldn't get too upset about my complaining when we get up there. In the meantime, I paid a visit to the Swamp Tourist Center in hopes of seeing Trixie, but was told she had left to go on an errand and wouldn't be back for several hours. I was disappointed about not getting to see her, but I could always do so again. When I reset time it would mean going through all that trouble again, but that was the one drawback when it came to going back to the beginning of the 72-hour cycle. Trenderhoof, who didn't recognize me, mentioned the contest he was having, yet I already got the reward, so I didn't need to show him anything else. He did mention a game Trixie had prepared in her spare time, but it was something I had to pass on. On the way back through the path that connected the southern swamp to Termina Field, I thought about shooting down Pinkie Pie with an arrow, a better alternative than using a bubble, and ask her anything about Snowhead, but then I remembered her unusual quirk. She wouldn't tell me anything unless I happened to be in the region itself. I did consider shooting her down for a chat, but Twilight suggested otherwise, saying we needed to get back to town as soon as possible. By the time I reached the outside of Clock Town, the sun had already set and the night was slowly settling in. Night of the second day, 36 hours remain.
We just barely made it back as the sun went down.
Twilight said.
I know you wanted me to use the Song of Soaring, but I figured taking the long way back would prove beneficial.
I said.
In the future, please consider using that song. It will definitely save us plenty of time otherwise. That depends on finding more of those owl statues. By the way, Sunset. Why did you come over to the western entrance of Clock Town?
Twilight asked. Normally, I would have walked through the southern entrance as it was where we embarked upon leaving originally for the swamp. But, I wanted to check out the shops to see if any of them had the supplies I needed to combat Snowhead. When I mentioned my reasons to Twilight, she floated in front of me before quickly darting back and began hopping up and down on my hat.
The shops should be open even though the sun has gone down, but I suggest you be careful. Strange characters do come out at night. Do I have enough rupees? You can always take some out of the bank. It makes me wish that I had a bigger wallet,
I said, taking it out and sighing upon looking at it. It could only hold up to 99 rupees. While that was indeed an incredible sum that could fit into it, there were items in the shops that cost more than that. If I wanted those expensive items, I needed a larger wallet. I had no idea where I could get my hands on one, but it became increasingly obvious that I needed more rupees.
Remind me to deposit more rupees at the bank before we reset time. You could do with having some in the bank. If I don't get an upgrade soon, buying certain items is going to be impossible,
I said, putting my wallet back in my pocket. Just as I took my hand out of my pocket after putting my wallet into it, a strange sound suddenly echoed all around me.
Twilight, do you hear someone playing music?
The sound was rather faint, but it was coming from on top a large rock formation that resembled some kind of mushroom.
I can definitely hear music, although it sounds more like a whistle than anything else.
I perked up my ears in hopes of hearing the sound a lot better, and sure enough, it was coming in loud and clear, and from on top of that rock.
Who do you suppose could be out here at night? I don't know, but what say we find out? Didn't you want to visit the shops? With my wallet? I'd rather have a larger one than what I currently have. True. Besides, this may prove interesting,
I said. Twilight shrugged her shoulders. She knew that once I made a decision, I planned on sticking through with it. There were several mushroom-like rock formations on the west side of Termina Field, yet the largest rock was where the sound was coming from. In the distance, I could barely make out someone standing on top of it, and it looked like they were in pain. I walked towards the rock, and as I did, the music continued to get louder until I eventually reached it. On top of the rock were a pile of stones, and standing in the middle of them was a strange man who was wearing nothing but a white loincloth. He was dancing about in an unusual manner, and every so often, he would squat down slightly. I thought he was doing something naughty before rising again. His most distinguishing features were the stubble on his chin and the hairstyle of his blonde hair. The strangest thing about this man had to be his complexion, or rather his lack of it. He looked utterly pale, as though he hadn't eaten anything for days, but I'd soon realize what was really going on. Before I could cross the small gap between the rock and the ground, I was standing on a small wall. Was in the way. Twilight bopped me on the head, and I looked up at her to see what she wanted.
I don't believe it. What? That's Zephyr Breeze. I don't know anyone by that name. He's Fluttershy's younger brother. I'm not sure if the human Fluttershy has any siblings, but the pony version sure does, and this would be him. When I first met him, he was a slacker who had no motivation to do anything himself, and would get some pony else to do it for him. He would start something but never finished it by simply giving up, all because of how laid back he was. Rainbow Dash couldn't stand him due to how he tried hitting on her, and he had a shaky sibling relationship with Fluttershy.
Twilight said.
Sounds like a pony you would love to hate. He managed to turn things around after several failed attempts and through encouragement by Rainbow and Fluttershy. Weren't expecting him to be here, were you? Not in the least. I might as well talk to him and see what he has to say,
I said. Twilight nodded, although I could tell she wasn't being sincere with me. This Zephyr Breeze must have rubbed her the wrong way back in Equestria, yet he was someone completely different in Termina. Her Highness didn't need to show any disdain towards him because he didn't know any better. The gap between the ground and rock was small, so I easily jumped across. Upon landing, Zephyr paid no attention to my presence, and instead continued dancing with no signs of stopping anytime soon. I was actually amazed at how unique his dance moves were compared to what I had seen on television. Since he ignored me initially, I walked up to him to get his attention, and he turned his head towards me.
I am no longer part of the living. My sadness to the moon. I haven't left my dance to the world. I am filled with regret.
Zephyr Breeze said. I had no idea what he was going on about, but it quickly became apparent that his pale complexion was the result of him being dead and not from a lack of food.
What are you talking about?
I asked.
I am no longer part of the living. My sadness to the moon. I haven't left my dance to the world. I am filled with regret.
Zephyr Breeze answered. Again, I had no idea what he was saying, and it started to make me very angry. He then noticed my expression and looked down before looking back up.
Translation: I am disappointed, O moon. I have died. Why did I come out here knowing full well that the creatures had grown restless? Is that how you died? Yes. O moon. Why did those creatures pursue me? I had caused them no ill will. Who are you? My name is of no consequence. I lost that when I no longer lived among the living. You've got to be kidding me? You may be dead, but that doesn't mean you aren't entitled to the identity of who you once were in life.
I said. Zephyr then looked up at the moon this time before looking at the ground, and followed it up by looking at me again. I didn't understand why he was doing that, but I had every mind to tell him to stop.
Oh moon, this one possesses a strong spirit. Glad you noticed. My name is Kamaro. When I was of the living, I perfected a dance that I had spent many years working on. It had been my life's work and now, I have died. Oh moon, I have died, and to you, strange child, my sorrow continues to linger even now. Oh, I planned to bring the world together and stir it into a giant melting pot with my dance. That was my only joy, and now I have lost all meaning. I am filled with regret.
Zephyr Breeze said.
You want to teach your dance to someone? That was my goal, but alas, I have died. What's stopping you from doing it anyway?
I asked. I quickly covered my mouth with my hands. He had clearly explained why he couldn't teach anyone his dance, yet I blundered by saying something so stupid. I then took a closer look at Zephyr's face. Despite how stoic it looked, I could see the tears trickling down his face. He truly wanted to bring inspiration to this world, yet now he couldn't.
If only I had taught my new dance to someone, I could finally rest in peace. How can someone do that? Oh moon, why did I die at the hands of the monsters? Answer my question.
Zephyr then went completely silent and continued dancing. I shouted him in an effort to get an answer, but he refused to say anything. Already, I was beginning to see why he was so annoying to Her Highness. I was just about to lose my temper when Twilight bopped me on the head again. She really enjoyed doing that to get my attention. Had she figured out the solution? I certainly couldn't see an answer.
He regrets not teaching someone his dance.
Twilight said.
Regret usually occurs when you remain tied to this world upon death. A grim way of looking at it, Sunset, but not incorrect. Have you figured out what we can do to help him? Well, he does appear to be tormented from not achieving his goal in life. Perhaps he needs to have his soul healed? That might make him feel better and give him the incentive to teach you his dance.
Twilight answered. To heal his soul meant playing the Song of Healing, but would that cause him to become sealed inside of a mask? I mean, that's what happened when I played it to remove the curse Starlight Glimmer gave me when I first stumbled into Termina. Was I willing to do the same thing to this innocent, also annoying spirit? I thought about it for a few moments before concluding that I had to heal him. I took out the Ocarina of Time from my pouch, raised it to my lips, and was about to play when I suddenly stopped and looked forward at Zephyr. I had forgotten how the song was meant to be played, as I had only played it the one time when I cured myself. I began thinking quickly as to how it went, hoping he wouldn't get annoyed over my actions. Her Highness, on the other hand, stared up at the moon before turning her attention back to what was happening. When I finally remembered how the song went, Zephyr sighed before starting to dance a little faster, and I knew that I had wasted enough of his time. Raising the ocarina to my lips, I played the Song of Healing, but it didn't have any effect. I thought perhaps I had played the wrong song or at least the wrong note, but I should have remembered that some forms of magic take time for them to work. Zephyr slowed down no sooner had he started speeding up, and something began to appear behind his back.
That song. Oh moon, it is so heavenly.
Zephyr Breeze said.
I have healed your soul. Could you be the one? My joy has been rekindled.
Zephyr Breeze said. What appeared behind his back started to glow, and he quickly spun around, grabbed it, spun back, and presented a mask. It was in the shape of his head, and had a really long neck that connected his head to what constituted as the part that went on my face.
Spread my dance across the world. Train its followers. Translation, I have taught it to you, now make it into a popular dance craze.
Zephyr held out his hands and I took the mask from them.
Is this your mask? By wearing it, you will be able to perform the very dance I spent years perfecting. Who am I supposed to show it to? There are those who are dedicated to the dance. Show them my life's joy. They shall in turn spread it, O moon, they shall.
Zephyr Breeze said. He then stopped dancing and lurched forward until his face was mere inches from mine. I felt really uncomfortable, yet I could see tears were no longer trickling down his face. Was this his way of telling me that I had helped him finally find peace?
I am counting on you. Translation, I am counting on you. O moon, I am counting on you.
Zephyr suddenly disappeared by vanishing in a puff of smoke, and it left Twilight feeling shocked over what she just witnessed. It didn't faze me in the least. After all, this was something I had seen before.
Where did he go?
Twilight asked.
His soul can finally rest knowing that I've accepted the responsibility of spreading his dance.
I answered.
Are you sure you can handle it, Sunset? I don't really have much of a choice, do I?
I asked. I looked down at the mask Zephyr had given me before he vanished. Upon a second glance, the tiny head on the mask that represented his head wasn't really Zephyr at all, but rather the real Komuro whom Fluttershy's younger brother had portrayed. Why did I think otherwise? Perhaps it was one of those
spur of the moment
moments that blinded me to what was real. This mask, according to Zephyr, would allow me to perform the dance that he performed throughout our entire encounter. I was to teach it to those who would become my followers and spread the dance further until it became incredibly popular. All I needed now was an actual dancer. The only place that would have a dancer was back in town, but that also meant searching every nook and cranny, and that could take up the rest of my time. I heaved a sigh knowing I didn't want to disappoint Zephyr, so I slowly walked through the western entrance of Clock Town, my head hung low. A strange music suddenly gripped my ears the instant I entered West Clock Town, and it immediately sounded familiar. I darted my head left and right to see where the music was coming from, and standing on the opposite side of the area were a pair of what I assumed were dancers. It wasn't their clothing that clued me in, but rather their terrible attempts at trying to perform some poses. It looked like things were suddenly looking up until Twilight floated near a guard who happened to be staring at the dancers. I thought that the town militia were supposed to be watching out for troublemakers, not ogling over a pair of women.
Excuse me,
I began, stepping closer to the guard.
Hey? And what can I do for you? Why are you staring at those women over there? Don't tell me you haven't heard of the famous Rosa Sisters of Gorman's troupe? They are renowned as being the best dancers in all of Termina, and were taught their craft by their mother who, in turn, was taught by her mother. That doesn't answer why you're looking at them. They were out here last night trying to come up with a dance routine, and now they're back at it again. I tried to ask them if they needed any assistance, but they said I was bothering them, and I've kept my distance since. Is that so? I feel sorry for those two, ma'am. They've done so many different routines throughout their careers, yet they wanted to do something special for the Carnival of Time. As you can see, it hasn't been working out very well, and it's made them really antsy.
I then looked at the Rosa Sisters again, and I could see where the guard was coming from. They started to perform a routine, but it quickly faltered when one of them stumbled over. The other helped her sister up before they resumed with a different routine.
A sad sight, wouldn't you say? And you say that they shun anyone who tries to talk to them. When you've got something as important as the Carnival of Time tomorrow night, it can produce an intense amount of pressure that stems from wanting to perform flawlessly in front of patrons who look up to you for inspiration. Is there anyone who can help them? There was one person who could have, but he passed away most unexpectedly. Oh? Who was it? His name was Komuro. Before the Rosa Sisters became a huge sensation, he was seen as Termina's greatest dancer, yet was rather eccentric. They say he was perfecting some kind of new dance no one had ever seen, yet when he went out into Termina Field one night, the monsters out there chased him down. I don't need to tell you what happened next as I think you can figure it out on your own.
It didn't take a genius to figure out what needed to be done here. The Rosa sisters needed a new dance routine, and what Zephyr had passed on to me was exactly what they needed to entertain their audience. With Kamaro's mask held firmly in my head, I walked over to the sisters, but immediately stopped upon realizing who they were. Much like how Twilight was surprised upon seeing Zephyr Breeze, I was surprised at who was standing before me.
"What's wrong, Sunset?"
Twilight asked.
"Look at who the Rosa sisters are."
Twilight looked at them for a few moments before looking back at me.
"I'm sorry, but I don't recognize either of them." "That's right. You weren't there for the friendship games, so you never met any of the Shadow Bolts. The one on the left is Indigo Zap, an athletic nut who is Rainbow Dash's biggest rival, and perhaps the most optimistic person Crystal Prep has ever seen regarding sports. She and Rainbow didn't see eye to eye during the games, but things have gotten better now since then. The other one is Sunny Flare, a student who desires perfection above anything else, and is willing to do whatever it takes in order to get it. She can be flamboyant, short-tempered, and proud, but she does possess quite the good heart,"
I said.
"What are the odds?" "Yeah. Ugh. That was another failed routine, sister,"
Indigo Zap said.
"At this rate, we're never going to be ready for the Carnival of Time tomorrow night,"
Sunny Flare said.
"I don't think it'll happen." "What? Of course the carnival has to happen. It's tradition. People in Clock Town have been celebrating at this time every year for generations. The thought of them suddenly breaking that trend is just ridiculous,"
Sunny Flare said.
Guru told me that he heard from Gorman that the carnival has been cancelled." "What? Why?" "Just look up at that moon,"
Indigo Zap said. Sunny Flare then looked up and scoffed at what she saw.
"I wouldn't do that if I were you, sister. That thing's getting really close now, and could very well smash this town to bits. Heck! It's likely going to smash all of Termina to bits. So what do you want me to do about it?" "Nothing, unless you know of a way to stop the moon. Let's just focus on what we do best, sister, and that's practice for the carnival. I'll bet this whole moon business is just a bunch of nonsense designed to scare everyone from coming to town tomorrow night,"
Sunny Flare said.
"Quite the optimism. I'll bet they'll go through with the carnival despite what's falling above us."
Was Sunny Flare being serious? Was she so ignorant about the moon that she pretends that it's nothing more than a hoax? I understood that not everyone is accepting the fact that the moon will crash into Clock Town tomorrow evening, but they were trying to hide the truth from their eyes. Anyone who sees the moon must know this world hangs precariously by a thread that continues to weaken until it breaks. But, I was getting ahead of myself by focusing on the wrong thing. If I were to walk up to the two sisters and start complaining about Sunny Flare's attitude regarding the moon, it would make me look to be the bad guy, and they'd refuse my help. I had to help them learn a new dance routine. End of chapter.